The wind out here didn't just blow, it scraped. It peeled layers off the land like old paint, left everything raw and exposed. Caleb Rourke had been riding for 3 days without seeing another soul, and that suited him fine. Out on this stretch of nothing between settlements, a man could disappear into the dust and the silence, could let the world forget him the way he'd tried to forget the world. His horse moved slow beneath him, tired but steady. The animal knew the rhythm of these empty miles as well as Caleb did, the long stretches where nothing happened, where the sun just carved hours out of the day and left you older on the other side. Caleb's hat was pulled low, his eyes half shut against the glare. He wasn't looking for anything, hadn't been looking for anything in a long time. Then he heard it. At first he thought it was the wind playing tricks, the way it sometimes whistled through rocks and made sounds that almost seemed human. But this sound cut through the monotone howl with a clarity that made his chest tighten. A baby crying, thin and desperate, the kind of sound that meant something was very wrong. Caleb reined in his horse and sat still, listening. The cry came again, carried on the wind from somewhere off to the east. He turned in his saddle, squinting toward a cluster of rocks and scrub brush maybe half a mile away. Nothing moved out there, just heat shimmer and dust devils spinning themselves into nothing. He should keep riding. That's what a smart man would do. Out here, other people's troubles had a way of becoming your own, and Caleb had enough of his own to carry. But the sound came again, weaker this time, like whatever was making it didn't have much left. "Damn," he muttered, and turned his horse toward the cry. The ride took longer than it should have. The land out here was deceptive. What looked like flat ground from a distance turned out to be gullies and rises that forced you to double back and find new routes. The whole time, that thin wail kept threading through the air, pulling him forward like a rope he couldn't let go of. When he finally came around an outcrop of rock, he saw them. A woman was tied to a post driven into the ground, rough wood, the kind used for fencing. Her wrists were bound above her head with rope that had cut deep enough to draw blood. Her dress was torn, her face swollen with bruises that looked a day or two old. She hung there half-conscious, her head lolled to one side. At her feet, wrapped in a stained blanket and screaming with the full force of new lungs, was a baby. Caleb dismounted and approached slowly. His hand went to the knife at his belt, but he didn't draw it yet. This felt like the kind of scene you stumbled into just before an ambush. He scanned the horizon, nothing but empty land in every direction. No horses. No tracks except old ones, half filled with blown sand. The woman stirred as his shadow fell across her. Her eyes cracked open, dark eyes, glazed with pain and exhaustion. She tried to speak, but only managed a dry rasp. "Easy," Caleb said. He moved to the post and started working on the ropes. They were tied tight, knotted with deliberate cruelty. Whoever had done this had meant for her to die here, slow and hard. "I'm going to cut you down." She didn't respond. Maybe she couldn't. Caleb sawed through the rope with his knife, catching her weight as she fell forward. She was lighter than he expected, or maybe just that used up. He lowered her to the ground, and she curled onto her side, barely conscious. The baby's screaming hadn't let up. Caleb looked down at the bundle. A boy, he could see now, red-faced and furious at the world. The blanket he was wrapped in was damp, probably hadn't been changed in a day. The kid was maybe a few weeks old, if that. Caleb had a canteen on his saddle. He went and got it, brought it back to the woman. "Can you drink?" he asked, lifting her head gently. She opened her mouth, and he tipped water onto her lips. She choked at first, then managed to swallow. After a few sips, some clarity came back into her eyes. She looked at him, really looked at him, and something like fear crossed her face. "Who did this?" Caleb asked. Her voice came out cracked and broken. My husband's family. They said I shamed them, said the baby wasn't his." Caleb glanced at the screaming infant. "Is it?" She met his eyes, and in that look was something harder than the desert floor. "Yes." "Then why?" "Because he died," she said. 2 months before the baby came. They did the math, called me a whore, said I carried another man's bastard. She coughed, winced. They didn't want scandal. Easier to make us disappear. Caleb looked around at the emptiness surrounding them. Out here, disappearing was easy. People did it all the time, by choice or otherwise. In a place where law was whatever the strongest man said it was, You could do just about anything if you had the will and the numbers. What's your name? He asked. Eliza, she whispered. Eliza Vance. I'm Caleb. He stood, went to his horse, and pulled a blanket from his bedroll. When he came back, he wrapped it around her shoulders. Can you ride? I don't. She looked at him with confusion, like she couldn't quite process what was happening. You're not leaving me? The question hit him wrong. Not because it was asked, but because she'd clearly expected the answer to be yes. How many people had already ridden past this spot? How many had heard that crying and kept going? No, Caleb said. I'm not leaving you. He fashioned a sling from his spare shirt and settled the baby against Eliza's chest, then helped her into his saddle. She could barely hold herself upright. Caleb mounted behind her, keeping one arm around her waist to steady her as they rode. The baby had finally stopped screaming, exhausted into a fitful sleep. His cabin was 2 hours north. Caleb hadn't been back in a week, and he'd been planning to avoid it longer. There was a certain peace in staying nowhere, in being nobody. But plans changed. They always did when people got involved. The ride was silent except for the horse's hooves and the wind. Eliza drifted in and out of consciousness, her head sometimes falling back against Caleb's shoulder. The baby slept, and Caleb stared ahead at the horizon, wondering what the hell he'd just signed himself up for. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of rust and blood. The structure sat in a shallow valley, sheltered by rocks on 3 sides. It wasn't much, 4 walls, a roof that mostly kept the rain out, a stone fireplace that drew smoke better than it had any right to. But it was solid. Caleb had built it himself 3 years back, after deciding he was done with towns and their noise and their expectations. He dismounted and helped Eliza down. She could barely stand. He half-carried her inside and laid her on the single bed in the corner, a frame he'd made from lodgepole pine and a mattress stuffed with prairie grass. She didn't protest, didn't say anything, just closed her eyes. The baby stirred and started fussing. Caleb stood there looking at the kid, feeling completely out of his depth. He knew horses, knew how to survive alone. But babies, that was territory he'd never mapped. He needs to eat, Eliza murmured without opening her eyes. Right. Caleb looked around his cabin like the answer might be written on the walls. What is he? Me, she said quietly. He needs me. She struggled to sit up, and Caleb helped her, propping her against the wall with his spare blanket behind her back. She unwrapped the baby and brought him to her chest. The kid latched on after a moment of confused rooting, and the cabin filled with the small sounds of feeding. Caleb turned away, busied himself with building a fire. It gave him something to do with his hands, somewhere to look that wasn't at this woman and child who'd become his responsibility in the span of an afternoon. The kindling caught, flames spreading to the larger wood. Heat began to push back against the evening chill. Why? Eliza asked after a while. Caleb didn't look up from the fire. Why what? Why help us? You don't know me. Don't know him. We're nothing to you. He added another log, watched sparks spiral up toward the chimney. You needed help. Lots of people need help out here. You were dying. Lots of people are dying. Caleb turned to face her then. The firelight caught the bruises on her face, made them look darker. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not gratitude, not suspicion. Something else. Something tired. I don't have a good answer for you, he said. I heard the baby crying and I couldn't ride past it. That's all. Most men could. Yeah, well. He looked away. I'm not most men. She was quiet for a moment. The baby had finished feeding and was making small, contented sounds. What happens now? She asked. Now you rest. Get your strength back. And then? Caleb moved to the small table where he kept his supplies. He pulled out some dried meat and hardtack, started preparing something that could pass for a meal. Then we figure it out. They'll come looking, Eliza said. Her voice had gone flat. My husband's family, when they find out I'm not dead, they won't find you here. You don't know them. They're not the type to let go. Caleb brought her water and food, set it on the bed beside her. I don't care what type they are. She looked at him like he'd just said something in a language she didn't speak. You should care. These aren't reasonable people, Caleb. They decided I needed to die and they made it happen. Or they thought they made it happen. When they realize they failed, then they can take it up with me. You're one man. I've been one man for a while now. It's worked out fine. Eliza shook her head slowly, but she didn't argue further. She picked at the food he'd brought, managed a few bites. The baby slept in her arms, tiny and fragile and completely unaware of how much trouble he'd already caused just by existing. That first night set the pattern for the ones that followed. Eliza slept fitfully, waking often, sometimes from pain, sometimes from nightmares that had her sitting up gasping in the dark. The baby woke every few hours to eat, his cries cutting through whatever thin sleep Caleb managed on the floor by the fire. Days blurred together. Caleb hunted, brought back rabbit and sage hen. He collected water from the creek a mile east. He kept the fire going and tried not to think too hard about how his solitary life had suddenly become crowded with responsibility. Eliza's body healed slowly. The rope burns on her wrists scabbed over, the bruises faded from purple to yellow-green. But there were other wounds, the kind that didn't show on skin. Caleb would catch her staring at nothing, her eyes distant and hollow. She didn't talk much, just took care of the baby with mechanical efficiency and otherwise seemed to be somewhere far away. On the fourth day, she finally spoke more than a few words. "I need to tell you something," she said. They were sitting outside in the late afternoon. The baby was asleep in a makeshift cradle Caleb had put together from a crate and some blankets. Caleb was working on repairing a saddle strap. "All right. My husband, William. He was a good man, quiet, kind." She paused. "He died in his sleep, just didn't wake up one morning. The doctor said it was his heart." Caleb kept working on the strap, giving her space to talk. "We'd been trying for a baby for 2 years, Eliza continued. "I'd lost 3 before they even showed. When I finally carried past the first few months, we were so happy." Her voice cracked. "William was going to be a father. He told everyone, made plans, built a cradle." "The baby's his," Caleb said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, but he died before..." She gestured helplessly. "Before it showed, before anyone could see. And his mother, Elizabeth Vance, she runs that whole family like it's her personal kingdom. She did the counting, told me I couldn't possibly be carrying William's child, said I must have taken up with someone after he died, called me a whore in front of the whole town." "And nobody stood up for you?" Eliza laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Stand up to Elizabeth Vance? In a town where the Vances own half the land and most of the business? People believe what's convenient, Caleb, what won't cost them." "So they let her do this to you?" "They helped," Eliza said quietly. "William's brothers. They're the ones who tied me to that post. His cousin drove the wagon. The town preacher blessed their decision, said they were cleansing the community of sin." She looked at her son, sleeping peacefully. "They were going to let us both die. Would have, if you hadn't..." She didn't finish. Didn't need to. Caleb set down the saddle strap and looked out at the empty land stretching in every direction. "They're going to come," he said. "I know. Could be I should take you somewhere else. Somewhere they can't find you. There's nowhere like that. Not around here. There's other territories. California. Maybe Oregon." Eliza shook her head. "I don't have money for passage. Don't have anything except what you've given me." She met his eyes. "I'm not your problem, Caleb. You saved us. That's already more than anyone else did. You don't owe me anything beyond that." "Didn't say I owed you." "Then why would you..." "Because leaving you to fend for yourself right now is the same as tying you to that post myself," Caleb said. "And I'm not doing that." They sat in silence for a while. The sun was getting low, turning the distant mountains into dark silhouettes. Somewhere out in that emptiness, the Vance family was probably wondering whether Eliza had died yet, whether her body had been picked clean by scavengers, whether they could close that ugly chapter and move on. "What do we do?" Eliza asked finally. "We stay ready," Caleb said, "and we don't make it easy for them." That night he cleaned his rifle and his pistol, checked his ammunition. He'd been in fights before, more than he liked to remember. Had learned early that men who wanted to hurt you generally found a way unless you showed them it would cost more than they were willing to pay. Days turned into a week, then two. No one came. The routine of the cabin settled into something almost normal. Eliza getting stronger, the baby growing, Caleb making sure they had what they needed. He built a better cradle, this one with rockers. Fixed the leak in the roof he'd been meaning to address for months. Dug a better fire pit outside for cooking. Eliza started helping with small things, mending his shirts, preparing meals, organizing the chaos of his supplies into something resembling order. She didn't ask permission, just started doing it, and Caleb didn't stop her. Having another person around was strange, but not in a bad way. The cabin felt less like a hiding place and more like a home. The baby, she'd named him Thomas after her father, was starting to notice the world. His eyes would track movement, and sometimes he'd make sounds that weren't quite crying. Just sounds. Baby sounds. Caleb found himself talking to the kid while Eliza rested, telling him about the land, about the animals they'd seen. The baby didn't understand, obviously, but he seemed to like the sound of Caleb's voice. It was during the third week that everything changed. Caleb had ridden into the nearest settlement, a crossroads town called Bitter Creek about 15 miles south, to trade for supplies. He didn't like going, but they needed things he couldn't hunt or make: salt, coffee, cloth for the baby. He kept his head down, did his business quick, and was about to leave when he overheard two men talking outside the general store. Heard the Vance families got themselves worked up about something, one was saying. When aren't they worked up? The other replied. No, this is different. Elizabeth sent her boys out looking for something. Won't say what, but they've been riding the territory asking questions. Caleb's hand tightened on his horse's reins. Probably some poor bastard who crossed them, the first man said. You know how they are. Think they own everything, including people. Well, they kind of do. At least around here. The men moved off, their conversation fading. Caleb stood there a moment processing. Then he mounted up and rode back toward the cabin faster than he'd ridden out. When he got back, Eliza was outside, hanging laundry on a line he'd strung between two posts. She took one look at his face and went still. They're looking, he said. She didn't ask who, just nodded slowly and looked toward where Thomas was sleeping in his cradle, safe in the shade. How long do we have? Don't know. Could be days. Could be hours. Eliza wrapped her arms around herself. I should leave. Take Thomas and go. You've done enough. You're not leaving. Caleb, you wouldn't make it a day on your own with a baby, and even if you did, where would you go? He dismounted, started unloading the supplies. We're past the point of running. Then what? He looked at her, this woman who'd been left to die, who'd survived anyway, who was standing here trying to protect him from consequences that weren't his fault. Then we make them understand that you're under my protection, and if they want to change that, they'll have to go through me. They'll kill you. They can try. Eliza closed her eyes. When she opened them again, there was something different there. Not hope, exactly, but maybe the beginning of it. Why are you doing this? Caleb had been asking himself the same question. Out here, people didn't help each other without expecting something back. That's how the world worked. You looked out for yourself because nobody else would. But standing there in the fading light, watching this woman who'd been beaten and abandoned and left for dead, still trying to protect him, Caleb realized his answer was simpler than he'd thought. Because it's right, he said, and because I can. That night, they didn't sleep much. Caleb kept watch from the window, rifle across his lap. Eliza sat with Thomas, holding him close, whispering things Caleb couldn't hear. The fire burned low and the night stretched long. Dawn came cold and clear. Caleb made coffee, strong and bitter. They were on their second cup when he heard it, the sound of horses approaching from the south. Get Thomas and go to the back room, Caleb said quietly. Eliza didn't argue. She scooped up the baby and disappeared. Caleb stood, checked his rifle, and walked to the door. He didn't open it, just stood there, waiting. The horses stopped outside. Caleb counted the sounds, at least 4, maybe 5. Boots hit the ground, low voices conferring. Then a knock, polite, almost friendly. Mr. Rourke? A man's voice, smooth and educated. "My name is Marcus Vance. I'd like a word if you don't mind." Caleb stayed silent. "I know you're in there," Marcus continued, "and I know you have something that belongs to my family. We're not here for trouble, just a conversation." Still Caleb waited. "Mr. Rourke, I'm going to ask you to open this door. We can be civil about this, or we can be uncivilized. The choice is yours." Caleb finally spoke. "You can say what you need to say from out there." A pause. Then, "Very well. We're looking for a woman. Eliza Vance. She's family, my late brother's widow. She's not well, Mr. Rourke, hasn't been since William died. We had her under care, but she ran off with her baby. We're concerned for her safety, for the child's safety." The lies were smooth, practiced. Caleb felt anger rising in his chest but kept his voice level. "Don't know anyone by that name." "Really?" "Because we've been asking around. Trader named Simmons said he saw you in Bitter Creek yesterday, buying supplies. Baby supplies." Marcus's voice hardened slightly. "Now, I'm a reasonable man, Mr. Rourke, but I'm also a man who protects his family. If Eliza is here, and I believe she is, I need you to understand that she's confused, grieving, not in her right mind. The child is William's son, which makes him a Vance. He belongs with his family." "Family that left his mother to die in the desert," Caleb said. Silence outside. Then Marcus spoke again, and this time all the smoothness was gone. "I don't know what lies she's told you, but that woman is not fit to raise a Vance. She's a whore who spread her legs before my brother's body was cold. The child might be his, we'll raise him proper, but she has no place in our family, no place in decent society." Caleb's grip tightened on the rifle. "You've said your piece. Now leave." "I can't do that." "You can, and you will." "Mr. Rourke, you seem like a smart man. Don't make yourself an enemy of the Vance family over some woman you barely know. We have resources, influence. We can make your life very difficult out here." "You can try," Caleb said, "but you'll do it from somewhere else. This is my land. You're not welcome on it." Another pause. Caleb could hear low voices conferring, Marcus and whoever he'd brought with him. Then boots approaching the door. "Last chance," Marcus said. "Send her out with the child, and we'll forget this ever happened. Keep her, and we'll come back with enough men to burn this cabin to the ground with all of you in it." Caleb didn't answer. He just stood there, waiting. Finally, he heard Marcus sigh. "Have it your way. But this isn't over, Rourke. Not by a long shot." The boots retreated. Horses shuffled and turned, then the sound of them riding away, back south toward wherever they'd come from. Caleb stayed at the door for a long time, making sure they were really gone. When he finally moved, he found Eliza standing in the doorway of the back room, Thomas in her arms, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I never meant—" "Don't," Caleb said. "This isn't your fault. They'll come back. You heard him. Let them come." Eliza shook her head. "You don't understand. The Vances, they don't make empty threats. If Marcus said he'll burn this place down, he will, and he'll bring enough men to make sure he can do it." Caleb looked at her, at the baby in her arms, at this life he'd somehow become responsible for. He thought about running, about packing up and heading west or north or anywhere that wasn't here, but running meant always looking over your shoulder, meant never being able to stop. "Then we'd better be ready when they do," he said. Outside, the sun climbed higher. The land stretched empty and indifferent in all directions. And somewhere out there, the Vance family was planning their return. The war had started. Caleb just hoped he was ready to fight it. The days after Marcus Vance's visit moved differently. Time didn't exactly slow down, but it thickened. Every sound became a potential threat, every horizon a place where riders might appear. Caleb found himself waking at odd hours, rifle in hand, heart pounding from dreams he couldn't quite remember. The cabin that had felt like sanctuary now felt like a trap with only one way in and one way out. Eliza noticed. She'd watch him from across the room, her face pinched with worry she tried to hide. "You need to sleep," she'd say, and he'd nod and lie back down and stare at the ceiling until dawn. 3 days passed, then 4. No riders came. The silence should have been comforting, but it wasn't. It felt like the pause before lightning strikes, That electric stillness when you know something's coming but can't see it yet. On the fifth morning, Caleb made a decision. "I'm riding to Bitter Creek," he told Eliza over breakfast. She was feeding Thomas, and the baby's small, contented sounds filled the cabin. "Need to get a sense of what's happening, what people are saying." Eliza's hand stilled on Thomas's back. "That's dangerous." "Staying ignorant is more dangerous. They'll recognize you. Word's probably spread by now that you're the one who has me." "Maybe," Caleb said. "But I need to know what we're dealing with, whether they're gathering men, whether they're planning something." He pushed his plate away, the food barely touched. "I can't protect you if I don't know what's coming." Eliza was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Be careful." "Always am." It was a lie, and they both knew it. The ride to Bitter Creek took 3 hours. Caleb kept off the main trail, following ridgelines and dry creek beds where he could see anyone approaching before they saw him. The land cooperated, gave him cover when he needed it, opened up when he had to move fast. By the time he reached the outskirts of town, the sun was high and mean. Bitter Creek wasn't much of a town. A main street with maybe a dozen buildings, half of them looking like they might blow over in a strong wind. The general store, the saloon, a building that served as both church and schoolhouse depending on the day. A livery stable that smelled like horse piss and resignation. This was the kind of place people ended up when they'd failed everywhere else, or when they were trying to disappear. Caleb tied his horse at the far end of the street and walked toward the saloon. A few people watched him pass. A woman sweeping her porch, 2 old men sitting outside the livery, a kid who should have been in school. Their eyes tracked him with the kind of attention people paid to strangers in small towns, measuring, judging, deciding whether he was worth remembering. The saloon was dim and smelled like old beer and older regrets. 4 men sat at tables scattered around the room, nursing drinks that probably weren't their first of the day. The bartender, a thick man with forearms like fence posts, looked up when Caleb entered. "Help you?" he asked. "Whiskey," Caleb said, taking a stool at the bar. "Whatever you've got that won't kill me." The bartender poured 2 fingers into a glass that had seen better days and slid it across. Caleb tossed a coin on the bar and took a sip. It was rough, but honest, the kind of whiskey that didn't pretend to be anything it wasn't. "Passing through?" the bartender asked. "Something like that." "Haven't seen you around before." "Haven't been around before." The bartender nodded slowly, reading the message, "Mind your own business." He moved down the bar to wipe glasses that were already clean. Caleb nursed his drink and listened to the conversations happening around him. 2 of the men at the tables were arguing about a fence line. Another was telling a story about a horse that went lame. Normal talk. The kind of thing you heard in every saloon in every small town. But then the 4th man, sitting alone in the corner, older than the others with a face like weathered leather, spoke up. "Any of you boys heard what the Vances are up to?" The conversations died. Everyone looked at the old man. "What do you mean?" one of the fence line arguers asked. "Was in town yesterday," the old man said. "Saw Marcus Vance and 4 of his boys loading up supplies. Lots of supplies. The kind you take when you're planning to be somewhere for a while." "Maybe they're just provisioning one of their camps," the storyteller offered. "Maybe," the old man said. "Except I heard Marcus talking to that gunfighter he keeps on retainer. You know, the one from Texas. Mean-looking son of a bitch." Caleb's grip tightened on his glass. "What were they talking about?" the bartender asked, abandoning any pretense of not listening. "Couldn't hear all of it, but I caught something about the cabin and making an example." The old man took a drink. "Whatever it is, it ain't good. When the Vances start hiring guns, somebody's about to have a real bad day." The other men shifted uncomfortably. One of them muttered something about needing to get back to work and left. The conversation moved on, drifted to safer topics. But Caleb had heard enough. He finished his whiskey and stood to leave. The bartender caught his eye. "You all right, friend?" he asked quietly. "Fine," Caleb said. "You look like a man who just got some bad news." Caleb met his eyes. "I look like a man who needs to get home." He left before the bartender could respond. Outside, the sun seemed brighter, harsher. The street felt longer than it had when he'd arrived. Caleb untied his horse and mounted up. every instinct screaming at him to ride fast and hard. But riding fast drew attention, and he'd already pushed his luck by coming here. The ride back felt like it took years. Every shadow could be an ambush. Every rise could hide riders. Caleb kept his rifle loose in its scabbard, his hand never far from the grip. His mind ran through scenarios. How many men might Marcus bring? What routes they'd take? How much time he had to prepare? By the time he reached the cabin, the sun was starting to dip toward the western horizon. Eliza was outside, hanging laundry. She dropped the shirt she was holding when she saw his face. What happened? Caleb dismounted, led his horse to the small corral he'd built. They're coming. Soon. How soon? Don't know. Could be tomorrow. Could be next week. He started unsaddling the horse, his movements sharp and efficient. But they're preparing. Marcus hired a gunfighter. Eliza's face went pale. A gunfighter? That's what I heard. Then we need to leave, right now. Pack whatever we can carry and go where? Caleb turned to face her. Eliza, they're not going to stop looking. Running just means they'll hunt us across 3 territories instead of 1. Better than dying here. Maybe. Or maybe we make our stand where we have some advantage. He gestured at the cabin, the surrounding rocks. I know this land, know every approach, every line of sight. Out there, we're just targets in the open. Eliza wrapped her arms around herself, that gesture he'd seen so many times now when she felt helpless. I can't let you die for me. Nobody's dying, Caleb said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. But I need you to trust me. Can you do that? She looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded, barely. That night, Caleb started preparing. He moved supplies from the cabin to the rocks behind it, water, ammunition, dried food. He scouted the approaches, marking in his mind where he'd need to position himself if it came to a fight. The land gave him some options. The rocks provided cover. The cabin sat in a natural basin that made it hard to approach unseen from most directions. But if Marcus brought enough men, if he was willing to take casualties, the rocks in the basin wouldn't matter. Numbers eventually won. That was just mathematics. Eliza watched him work with a look he couldn't quite read. Sometime after midnight, when he came back inside for more ammunition, she was still awake, sitting at the table with a cup of cold coffee. You don't have to do this, she said quietly. Caleb paused in the doorway. Yeah, I do. Why? I need you to tell me why you're willing to die for people you barely know. He set the ammunition box down and sat across from her. The question deserved a real answer, and maybe he owed her that much. You know what I did before I came out here? He asked. Eliza shook her head. I was a soldier, fought in a war that made no sense for reasons I never understood, watched good men die for land that didn't matter, for officers who saw us as numbers on a report. He looked at his hands, scarred and calloused. When it was over, I told myself I was done. Done with other people's fights, done with caring what happened to anyone but me. What changed? Nothing changed, Caleb said. I'm still done with other people's fights, but this isn't that. He met her eyes. Those men left you to die because it was easier than dealing with the truth. They tied you to a post and walked away because their reputation mattered more than your life. That's not a fight. That's murder dressed up as propriety. And you stopping it makes you what? A hero? No, Caleb said. It makes me someone who couldn't ride past a dying woman and her baby. That's all. I'm not looking for redemption or trying to prove anything. He trailed off, searching for the right words. I just couldn't let it happen. Eliza was quiet. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over his. Her skin was warm, rougher than it probably used to be after weeks of surviving. Thank you, she said, for not riding past. Caleb nodded. He didn't trust himself to say anything else. The next morning brought rain, a rare gift in this dry country. Caleb stood outside and let it hit his face, wash away some of the dust and tension. The rain wouldn't last long, never did out here. But while it fell, the world felt cleaner somehow, newer. Eliza joined him, Thomas bundled against her chest beneath a blanket. He's starting to smile, she said. Did you notice? Yesterday he smiled at me. A real smile, not just gas. Caleb looked at the baby's face, barely visible under the blanket. That's good. Is it? Eliza's voice was bitter. What kind of life is he going to have? Running from his own family, living out here in the middle of nowhere with a mother they call a whore, and a man who, She stopped herself. A man who what? I don't know what you are to us, Caleb. Protector? Guardian? You're not his father, but you're the only one acting like... She shook her head. This is all wrong. None of this is how it's supposed to be. How's it supposed to be? I should be in town, in a house William and I bought together, raising our son with family around us, with neighbors who help in a community that cares. She looked out at the empty land. Not hiding in a cabin, waiting for armed men to show up and take everything away. Maybe that world you're describing never existed, Caleb said. Maybe it was just a story you told yourself. Eliza turned to him, anger flashing in her eyes. You don't know what my life was like. You're right, I don't, but I know what it is now, and pretending it should be something different doesn't change anything. So what? I just accept this? Accept that Thomas will grow up with a target on his back, that you'll probably die defending us, and I'll end up right back where I started? Maybe, Caleb said. Or maybe we survive this and find a way to actually live, but we don't get there by wishing things were different. The rain was already letting up, the clouds breaking apart. Eliza wiped her eyes. Whether from rain or tears, Caleb couldn't tell. I'm scared, she whispered. Good. Means you're paying attention. Aren't you scared? Caleb thought about lying, about being the strong protector she probably needed him to be, but something about the rain and the moment made him tell the truth instead. Yeah, he said. I'm terrified. They went back inside. The cabin felt smaller than usual, the walls closer. Caleb checked his weapons again, knowing they were fine but needing to do something with his hands. Eliza fed Thomas and then started cooking something that might pass for lunch. The normalcy of it felt surreal, like playing house while a storm gathered on the horizon. 2 more days passed, then 3. The waiting was its own kind of torture. Every morning Caleb expected to see riders on the horizon. Every night he lay awake listening for the sound of approaching horses. But nothing came. Just wind and silence and the slow tick of time. On the 4th day, something changed. Caleb was outside checking the water barrels when he saw it. A plume of dust to the south, maybe 2 miles out. Too big to be one rider. Too deliberate to be anything natural. He went inside quickly. They're coming! Eliza looked up from where she was playing with Thomas on the blanket. The color drained from her face. How many? Can't tell yet, but more than a few. He grabbed his rifle, started loading extra ammunition into his pockets. Take Thomas and the supplies I cached behind the cabin. There's a gap in the rocks about 30 yards back. You can see it from the northwest corner. Get there and stay low. What about you? I'm going to talk to them first. See if there's a way through this that doesn't end with shooting. There isn't, Eliza said. You know there isn't. Maybe, but I have to try. Eliza stood, Thomas in her arms. She looked at Caleb with something that might have been affection, or might have been fear, or might have been both. Don't die, she said. Wasn't planning on it. She left through the back. Caleb watched until she disappeared into the rocks, then turned his attention to the approaching dust. It was closer now, close enough that he could make out individual riders. He counted 6. No, 7. All mounted, all moving with purpose. Caleb stepped outside and stood in front of the cabin, rifle held loose but ready. The riders came on steady, not rushing but not hesitating either. As they got closer, Caleb recognized Marcus Vance in the lead. Same expensive coat, same self-assured posture. Behind him rode 4 men who looked like they could be brothers, all with the same hard features and cold eyes. Family men. Vance men. But it was the last 2 riders that made Caleb's stomach tighten. One was clearly the gunfighter the old man had mentioned, lean and dangerous-looking, with guns worn low on his hips. The other was older, maybe 60, with a marshal's badge pinned to his vest. They stopped about 20 yards from the cabin. Marcus dismounted and walked forward a few steps, hands visible and empty. Mr. Rourke, he said, voice carrying across the distance. We meet again. You're on my land, Caleb said. Indeed, and I apologize for the intrusion, but we have business to conclude. Marcus gestured to the man with the badge. "This is Marshal Hendricks. He's here to ensure everything proceeds legally." Caleb's eyes flicked to the marshal, who looked profoundly uncomfortable. "Legal how?" "Mrs. Vance, Eliza, is wanted for questioning regarding the death of her husband, William," Marcus said smoothly. "There are some irregularities in his passing that require investigation. And of course, there's the matter of the child. As William's family, we have certain rights regarding his upbringing." "Irregularities," Caleb repeated. "That's a creative way to describe what you did to her." "I'm afraid you've been fed a false narrative, Mr. Rourke. Eliza is not well. Hasn't been since William's death. She's made wild accusations, invented persecution where none exists. We're simply trying to help her." "By tying her to a post in the desert?" Marcus's expression didn't change. "I have no idea what you're referring to. No one in my family would do such a thing." The marshal cleared his throat. "Mr. Rourke, I need to speak with Mrs. Vance. Just a conversation. Then we can sort all this out properly." "She's not here," Caleb said. "Don't lie to me, son. We know she's here. Even if she was, she's under no obligation to talk to you." "Actually, she is," the marshal said, pulling a folded paper from his coat. "I have a writ here requiring her to answer questions regarding her husband's death. She can come willing, or I can compel her. Your choice." Caleb's hand tightened on his rifle. "That writ worth the paper it's written on?" "It's legal and binding." "Legal according to who? The judge that the Vances have in their pocket?" Marcus sighed. "Mr. Rourke, you're making this more difficult than it needs to be. We can resolve this peacefully. All we want is to talk to Eliza and ensure the child is properly cared for. Is that really so unreasonable?" "Yeah," Caleb said. "It is, given that your version of properly cared for involves his mother dying of exposure. These accusations are baseless, and where's your proof?" The gunfighter spoke up for the first time. His voice was quiet but carried weight. "You got proof this family did anything wrong?" Caleb looked at him. "I've got a woman with rope burns and bruises. Got her word about what happened." "Word of a crazy woman," Marcus said, "which, forgive me, isn't proof of anything except her mental state." The marshal shifted in his saddle. "Mr. Rourke, I'm going to ask you one more time. Let me speak with Mrs. Vance. If her story checks out, if everything's as you say, then we can address it properly. But hiding her isn't helping anyone. And if I say no?" The marshal's face hardened. "Then I'll have no choice but to assume you're obstructing justice. And these gentlemen here have every right to retrieve their family member by whatever means necessary. Even if those means include burning my cabin down? I would never allow us," the marshal started, but Marcus cut him off. "Let's not pretend this is complicated, Marshal. Mr. Rourke is harboring a woman wanted for questioning. He's refusing to cooperate with lawful authority. That makes him an outlaw." Marcus looked at Caleb. "Last chance. Send her out." "No." "Then you're making a choice that's going to cost you everything." The gunfighter's hand drifted toward his pistol. The four Vance brothers spread out slightly, creating a wider line. The marshal looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Caleb raised his rifle, not quite pointing it at anyone, but making his position clear. "First man who draws gets dropped. Second one might get me, but he'll have to climb over the first one's body to do it." "That the trade you want to make, Marcus?" "You're one man with one gun," Marcus said. "One man who knows every inch of this land, who's fought in battles you've only read about, who's got nothing to lose." Caleb's voice dropped. "You want to test me? Go ahead. But you better be sure, because I guarantee some of you aren't riding home." The silence stretched. Nobody moved. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Then the gunfighter spoke again. "He's not bluffing." Marcus turned to look at him. "What?" "I said he's not bluffing. I know the type. He'll kill as many of us as he can before we bring him down." The gunfighter looked at Caleb with something like professional respect. "Question is whether you're willing to pay that price." "We have numbers," one of the brothers said. "Numbers don't mean much when you're dead," the gunfighter replied. "And I didn't sign on to die for your family drama. I'm paying you to fight, not to commit suicide." The gunfighter turned his horse slightly. "You want this done? You're going to need more than 6 men, maybe a dozen, maybe more. And even then, it's going to cost you." Marcus's jaw clenched. He stared at Caleb with pure hatred, then looked at the cabin, probably calculating odds and costs. Finally, he turned to the marshal. "This isn't over," he said. "I expect not," the marshal replied quietly. Marcus mounted his horse. He looked at Caleb one last time. "You've bought yourself some time, Rourke, but it's just time. We'll be back, and when we come, we'll bring enough men to finish this." "I'll be here," Caleb said. The riders turned and left, the dust from their horses' hooves hanging in the air long after they disappeared over the southern rise. Caleb stood there, rifle still ready, until he was absolutely sure they were gone. Then his knees almost buckled. The adrenaline that had been holding him up drained away all at once, leaving him shaky and cold. He went to the cabin entrance and leaned against the doorframe, breathing hard. After a few minutes, Eliza emerged from the rocks, Thomas still bundled against her chest. She walked over slowly, her eyes scanning the empty horizon as if expecting the riders to reappear. "They left," she said. Not a question, just an observation. "For now." "What did they say?" Caleb told her, about the marshal, the writ, Marcus's threats. When he finished, Eliza looked somehow smaller than she had before. "A dozen men," she said. "Maybe more." "That's what he said." "You can't fight a dozen men, Caleb." "Probably not." "Then what do we do?" Caleb looked at her, this woman who'd survived everything thrown at her, who was still standing despite the world's best efforts to break her. And he realized he didn't have a good answer. He'd been operating on instinct and stubbornness, pushing back because pushing back was what he knew. But Marcus was right about one thing. Numbers eventually won. "I don't know," he admitted, "but we've got some time to figure it out." That night, neither of them slept much. They sat at the table, drinking coffee that had gone cold hours ago, trying to think of options that didn't exist. Run or fight, those were the only real choices, and both of them led to bad places. "There's a third option," Eliza said sometime around 3 in the morning. "What's that?" "I go with them, voluntarily. Answer the marshal's questions. Maybe if I cooperate, they'll what? Suddenly decide you're telling the truth? That their reputation matters less than justice?" Caleb shook his head. "You walk into their hands, you don't walk back out. But if I don't, they'll kill you getting to me, and then they'll take Thomas anyway." She looked at him with exhausted desperation. "At least my way you survive." "That's not an option. It's the only option that makes sense." "No," Caleb said firmly. "We don't trade your life for mine. That's not how this works." "Then how does it work? Because from where I'm sitting, we're just waiting for them to come back and finish what they started." Caleb didn't have an answer to that. He wanted to tell her it would all work out, that they'd find a way through. But the words felt empty even before he could speak them. Outside, the first light of dawn was starting to stain the eastern sky. Another day beginning. Another day closer to whatever was coming. The sun came up hard and bright, burning off what little coolness the night had left behind. Caleb stood outside the cabin, watching the land wake up, shadows retreating, colors bleeding back into the rocks and dirt. Everything looked the same as it had yesterday, but it felt different, like the ground had shifted somehow while he wasn't paying attention. He'd spent the last hour walking the perimeter, checking sight lines, thinking through defensive positions that probably wouldn't matter. A dozen men, maybe more. Marcus hadn't been making idle threats. The Vances had the money and the reach to hire that kind of force, and when they came back, they'd come prepared. Behind him, he heard the cabin door creak open. Eliza stepped out with Thomas on her hip, squinting against the glare. The baby was awake and alert, his eyes tracking a bird that passed overhead. For someone whose life was in danger, he looked remarkably peaceful. "You find any answers out here?" Eliza asked. "Not yet. Not..." "Maybe because there aren't any." She shifted Thomas to her other hip. "We could still run, head north before they get organized. They'd have to track us, and tracking takes time." "They'd find us," Caleb said. "Marcus isn't the type to let things go. He'd hunt us across 3 territories if that's what it took." "So we just wait here for them to come back with an army?" Caleb turned to face her. The morning light caught the lines around her eyes, exhaustion and stress etched into skin that was too young to wear them. "I'm working on it." "Work faster," she said, but there was no bite in it. just tired resignation. They went back inside. Eliza made breakfast while Caleb cleaned his weapons for the third time in 2 days. The ritual was pointless but comforting, something concrete to do while his mind chewed on problems that had no good solutions. "Tell me about William," Caleb said after a while. Eliza looked up from the pan where she was frying salt pork. "Why?" "Because I need to understand what I'm dealing with, who these people really are." She was quiet for a moment, then set down the fork she'd been using to turn the meat. William was different from the rest of them. Quieter, kinder. His mother hated that about him, said he was weak. But he wasn't weak. He just didn't think cruelty made you strong. "How'd you meet him?" "My father worked land adjacent to theirs. Not much land, just a small plot that barely produced enough to get by. But it was ours." She smiled faintly at the memory. "William used to ride past our property on his way to town. Started stopping to water his horse at our well. We'd talk. Nothing serious at first, just small conversation, but it became something." "His family didn't approve?" Elizabeth Vance didn't approve of anything that wasn't her idea. She had other plans for William, a girl from a family with more land, better connections. But William chose me anyway. The smile faded. "Sometimes I wonder if he regretted it, if being with me is what got him killed." Caleb looked up sharply. "You think they murdered him?" "I don't know. The doctor said it was his heart. But William was young, healthy, and the timing—" She trailed off, staring at nothing. 2 months later, I started showing. If he'd lived long enough to see it, no one could have questioned that Thomas was his. But he died right before anyone could tell, and that gave them room to plant doubt. Convenient. That's what I thought. But thinking something and proving it are different things. And even if I could prove it, who would listen? The Vances own half the county. The other half depends on them for work. You don't accuse people like that of murder, not if you want to keep breathing. The salt pork was starting to burn. Eliza turned back to the pan, salvaged what she could. They ate in silence, both lost in thoughts that didn't lead anywhere good. After breakfast, Caleb saddled his horse. Eliza watched from the doorway, arms crossed. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Bitter Creek. Need to send a message." "To who?" "Anyone who'll listen." It was a vague answer, and they both knew it, but Eliza didn't press. She just nodded and went back inside, closing the door behind her with a soft click that sounded like resignation. The ride to Bitter Creek felt longer than it had before. Caleb kept replaying the confrontation with Marcus in his head, looking for weaknesses he could exploit, angles he could work. The gunfighter had been right. Caleb wasn't bluffing about fighting. But he also wasn't stupid enough to think he could win against those odds, which meant he needed to change the odds. Bitter Creek was busier than last time. A freight wagon sat outside the general store, men unloading crates under the watchful eye of the owner. A few kids played in the street, kicking a ball made from rags and twine. Normal life, completely unaware of the small war brewing in the hills. Caleb tied his horse and headed for the saloon. The same bartender was behind the bar, and he looked up with recognition when Caleb walked in. "Back so soon?" the bartender said. "Need to talk to someone. Someone who knows the territory." "That could be a lot of people." "Someone who's not in the Vance's pocket." The bartender's expression shifted, became more guarded. "That's a shorter list." "I figured." The bartender wiped the bar in slow circles, thinking. Finally, he jerked his head toward the back. "Room upstairs, second door. Man named Carter. He's been around longer than most, seen more than he probably wanted to, doesn't owe the Vances anything." "He trustworthy?" "Depends on what you're asking him to trust you with." Caleb nodded and headed for the stairs. They creaked under his weight, protesting every step. The second door was half open, revealing a small room with a bed, a chair, and a man sitting at a makeshift desk made from crates. He looked up when Caleb knocked. Carter was maybe 50, with gray hair, and a face that suggested he'd been handsome once before life got rough with him. He sized Caleb up in a single glance, the kind of assessment that came from years of having to judge people quickly. "You're Rourke," Carter said. It wasn't a question. "Word travels." "In a place like this, word's about all we've got." Carter gestured to the chair. "Sit. Tell me why you're here." Caleb sat. I need information about the Vances, about what they're capable of. You mean besides leaving women to die in the desert? Carter's mouth twisted. I heard about that. Heard you're the fool who saved her. That make me a fool? Depends on whether you survive what comes next. Carter pulled out a bottle and 2 glasses, poured without asking if Caleb wanted any. The Vances have been running this territory for 20 years. Elizabeth's husband built the empire, but she's the one who holds it together. Ruthless doesn't begin to cover it. You cross her, you don't just get punished, you get erased, and she's got the resources to make it stick. What about the law? Carter laughed bitterly. The law is whatever Elizabeth says it is. That marshal who rode out to your place? Hendricks is on her payroll, has been for years. Any judge within 100 miles either owes her money or owes her favors. You're not fighting a family, Rourke. You're fighting a system. Systems can be broken. Sure, if you've got more men, more guns, and more money than they do. You got any of those things? Caleb took a drink. The whiskey burned, going down. No? Then you're planning to die for this woman and her baby. Which brings me back to my original question. Why are you here? Because dying's easier if I know what I'm up against. Carter studied him for a long moment. You really care about her? About the baby? I care about not letting murderers get away with it. Noble. Stupid, but noble. Carter refilled both glasses. All right. You want to know what you're up against? Here's the truth. Marcus Vance is the eldest son. Smart, calculating, completely devoted to protecting the family name. He'll do whatever it takes. His brothers are less smart, but just as mean. They grew up believing they were better than everyone else, and they act like it. The gunfighter Marcus hired is named Dalton Cross. He's killed at least 8 men that anyone knows about, probably more. He's expensive, but effective. The bartender said you don't owe the Vances anything. Why not? Because I already paid my debt. Carter's eyes went distant. 10 years ago, I had a ranch, small operation, but it was mine. Elizabeth wanted the land, had some scheme about expanding her holdings. Made me an offer that was insultingly low. I said no. 3 weeks later, my barn burned down. Month after that, my cattle got sick. One of my hands got beaten so bad he couldn't work anymore. I held out for 6 months before I finally sold, got less than her original offer. He drained his glass. That's how they operate. They don't just take what they want. They break you first, make you beg to give it up. That won't work on me. Because you've got nothing to break? That's what you think? Carter leaned forward. They'll break you through her, through the baby. They'll make you watch while they destroy everything you're trying to protect, and when you're hollow and broken, they'll kill you too, just to make a point. The words settled heavy in the room. Caleb had known it would be bad, but hearing it laid out so clearly made it real in a way it hadn't been before. There has to be a way, Caleb said. There isn't, not the way you're thinking. Carter poured again, more generous this time. But there might be something else. What? Elizabeth Vance is powerful, but she's not invincible. She's built her empire on fear and obligation, and that only works as long as people are more afraid of her than they are of the alternative. You want to beat her, you can't do it with guns. You have to expose her, make it impossible for people to look away. How? You find proof of what they did to Eliza. Real proof, not just her word, and you make it public in a way that can't be ignored, force people to choose sides. Most of them will still choose the Vances. Fear's a powerful motivator, but some won't. And if enough people refuse to look away, Elizabeth's power starts to crack. Caleb turned the idea over in his mind. What kind of proof? I don't know, but Marcus is careful. If he left Eliza to die, he made sure there were witnesses who'd tell the story his way. You need to find the ones who'll tell the truth, the ones he couldn't buy or scare. That's a long shot. It's the only shot you've got that doesn't end with you in a grave. Caleb finished his drink and stood. Thanks for the honesty. Honesty's cheap. Survival's expensive. Carter looked up at him. You really think you can pull this off? I think I have to try. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. Caleb left the saloon with more questions than answers. Carter was right. Fighting the Vances head-on was suicide. But finding proof of what they'd done? That seemed almost as impossible. Who would testify against them? Who would risk everything to tell the truth? He was halfway to his horse when he heard his name called. Turning, he saw a woman standing in the shadow of the general store. She was maybe 30, thin, with the kind of face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. "You're the one staying out at the old cabin," she said. "The one with Eliza Vance." "Who's asking?" "My name's Sarah, Sarah Brennan." She glanced around nervously, like she was afraid of being seen. "I need to talk to you, but not here, too many eyes." "Where?" "There's a creek bed north of town, dry this time of year. Meet me there in an hour, and don't let anyone follow you." Before Caleb could respond, she disappeared back into the shadows between buildings. He stood there a moment weighing the risk. It could be a trap, could be the Vances setting him up, but it could also be the break he needed. He mounted his horse and rode north, taking a roundabout path to make sure no one was trailing him. The creek bed Sarah mentioned was easy to find, a scar in the land where water used to flow before the drought years dried it up. He waited there in the shade of an overhang, rifle across his lap. Sarah appeared 20 minutes later, on foot. She scrambled down the bank and approached cautiously, hands visible. "You alone?" she asked. "Yeah." "Good. This conversation can't happen. Officially, I mean. If anyone knew I was talking to you..." She wrapped her arms around herself, that same gesture Eliza used when she felt helpless. "What do you know about Eliza?" Caleb asked. "I was there," Sarah said quietly, "when they took her. When they tied her to that post." Caleb's hand tightened on the rifle. "You saw it?" "I was working at the Vance house, kitchen help. Heard them planning it in the other room, Marcus and his brothers. They said Eliza had shamed the family, that she needed to be dealt with quietly." Her voice shook. "I watched them load her into the wagon. She was crying, begging them to let her keep the baby. They didn't even look at her, just drove away." "Why didn't you say anything?" "To who? The marshal works for them. The judge takes their money, and I'm nobody. A kitchen girl who needs the job to feed her own kids." Tears started down her face. "I know that makes me a coward. I know I should have done something, but I was scared. You're doing something now." "Because I can't sleep anymore. Can't look at my own children without thinking about what I let happen to hers." She wiped her eyes roughly. "If you're going to stand against them, I'll testify. I'll tell what I saw. But you have to understand, it won't be enough. Not by itself. Elizabeth will destroy me. She'll make sure I can't work anywhere in the territory. My children will starve." "Then why risk it?" Sarah looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "Because maybe some things are worth starving for. Maybe being able to look at myself is one of them." Caleb studied her face, looking for deception or hidden motives. All he saw was a woman who'd been carrying guilt like a stone and finally found a way to set it down, even if it cost her everything. "If you testify, you'll need protection," he said. "The Vances won't let you walk away from this." "I know." "You got somewhere you can go? Family outside the territory?" "My sister lives in Colorado, but getting there..." She shook her head. "I don't have money for passage. Don't even have money for food for the trip." Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out what little money he had, maybe $20 in coins and bills. He handed it to her. "It's not much, but it's a start." Sarah stared at the money like it was something foreign. "I can't take this." "You can and you will. Get your kids and leave tonight. Don't tell anyone where you're going. When you're safe, write to me care of the general store in Bitter Creek. I'll find a way to get your testimony to people who matter." "What people?" "Everyone around here is either afraid of the Vances or owned by them." "Then I'll find people further out. Territorial governor, maybe. Federal marshal. Someone who's not in Elizabeth's pocket." It was a thin plan, barely more than hope dressed up as strategy. But Sarah grabbed onto it like a lifeline. "You really think this can work?" she asked. "I think if we don't try, Eliza dies and the Vances win. And I'm not okay with that." Sarah nodded slowly. Then she did something unexpected. She hugged him. Quick and fierce, the kind of hug someone gives when they're drowning and you're the only solid thing in reach. "Thank you," she whispered, "for being the kind of person who gives a damn." She left the same way she'd come, scrambling up the creek bank and disappearing into the scrub. Caleb waited another 10 minutes to make sure she wasn't followed, then headed back to his horse. The ride back to the cabin felt different. He still didn't have a plan that would definitely work, but he had something, a witness, a crack in the Vance's armor. It wasn't much, but it was more than he'd had this morning. When he got back, Eliza was outside hanging laundry again. She'd taken to doing chores like they were armor against the fear, staying busy so she didn't have to think too hard about what was coming. She saw his face and dropped the shirt she was holding. What happened? Caleb told her about Carter, about Sarah, about the possibility of fighting this with truth instead of bullets. Eliza listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. "She'll leave?" Eliza asked when he finished. "Sarah will actually testify?" "She said she would." "And you believe her?" "Yeah, I do." Eliza picked up the fallen shirt and pinned it back on the line. "Even if she testifies, even if you find a federal marshal or the governor or whoever, it won't matter. Elizabeth will just call Sarah a liar, my word against hers. It's more than your word now, it's Sarah's too. And maybe there are others, other people who saw things, who know the truth, but have been too scared to speak. And if there aren't, then we're back where we started. But at least we tried something besides waiting to die." Eliza looked at him for a long time. Then she did something she hadn't done since he'd found her. She smiled. Not a big smile, not joy, just a small acknowledgement that maybe, possibly, there was a sliver of light in all this darkness. "You're either very brave or very stupid," she said. "Probably both." They went inside. Thomas was asleep in his cradle, one tiny fist curled against his cheek. Looking at him, Caleb felt the weight of what he'd taken on settle heavier on his shoulders. This wasn't just about Eliza anymore. It was about this kid getting a chance at a life that wasn't defined by his mother's suffering or his family's cruelty. "What do we do now?" Eliza asked. "Now we wait for Sarah to get clear. Give her a week to reach her sister. Then I'll start writing letters, to the territorial governor, to federal marshals, to anyone who might listen. Show them we're not just making accusations. We have a witness." "A week's a long time. Marcus could come back before then." "Maybe, but if he does, we'll deal with it." "How?" Caleb looked at his rifle leaning against the wall, at the ammunition he'd stockpiled, at the defensive positions he'd scouted. "Same way we've been dealing with everything else. We survive." The days that followed were strange. Life settled into a routine that felt almost normal: cooking, cleaning, taking care of Thomas, watching the horizon for riders that didn't come. But underneath it all was a current of tension that never quite went away. Every noise outside made them freeze. Every dust plume in the distance made Caleb reach for his rifle. Eliza talked more as the days passed. About William, about her life before everything went wrong, about the small dreams she'd had that seemed ridiculous now. A house with real windows, a garden where she could grow vegetables, Thomas learning to walk in a place where he'd be safe. "Sounds nice," Caleb said one evening. They were sitting outside watching the sun set, Thomas asleep against Eliza's chest. "Sounds impossible," she replied. "Maybe not." "You really think we can win this?" Caleb was quiet for a moment, watching the sky turn from gold to red to purple. "I think we can make them pay for what they did. Make it cost them enough that maybe they'll think twice about doing it to someone else. Whether that counts as winning, I don't know." "It's more than I thought I'd get," Eliza said softly. On the 7th day, Caleb rode back to Bitter Creek. He checked with the bartender. No messages, no word from Sarah. That could mean she was still traveling, or it could mean something had gone wrong. There was no way to know. He was about to leave when the bartender called him back. "Heard something you should know," the man said quietly. "Marcus Vance has been recruiting, putting together a group, 20 men, maybe more. They're planning something big." Caleb's stomach dropped. "When?" "Soon. That's all I know, but whatever they're planning, it's not good." Caleb rode back to the cabin faster than he should have, pushing his horse harder than was wise. When he arrived, everything looked normal. No riders, no signs of trouble. But normal didn't mean safe. Not anymore. "They're gathering," he told Eliza. 20 men, maybe more." The color drained from her face. 20? "That's what I heard." "We can't fight 20 men. Even you can't. I know." "Then what do we do?" Caleb looked around the cabin, at the life they'd built here, fragile and temporary as it was. "We make them think we're still here, and we leave." "Where would we go?" "There's a box canyon about 10 miles north, narrow entrance, good water source, game to hunt. We can camp there for a while, wait for things to settle. And if they don't settle, then we keep moving until we find somewhere they can't reach. Eliza looked at Thomas, at the cabin, at the small collection of belongings that represented everything she had. When do we leave? Tonight, after dark. We take only what we can carry. They spent the afternoon preparing. Caleb loaded supplies onto his horse, food, water, ammunition, blankets. Eliza packed Thomas's things with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to travel light. By the time the sun set, they were ready. Caleb built up the fire inside the cabin, made it look like someone was home and settling in for the night. He left one of the windows cracked, positioned things so that from a distance it would seem occupied. Then they slipped out the back and started walking north, leading the horse to keep the noise down. The night was cold and clear, stars scattered across the sky like thrown salt. Thomas slept in a sling against Eliza's chest, mercifully quiet. They moved slow, careful, stopping often to listen for sounds of pursuit. Hours passed. The cabin fell far behind. The landscape changed, rocks giving way to scattered trees, dry ground becoming slightly less dry. Caleb's legs ached and his shoulders burned from carrying the supplies, but he kept going. Beside him, Eliza moved with the determined silence of someone who'd learned that stopping meant dying. Dawn found them halfway to the canyon. They rested in a cluster of boulders, taking turns sleeping in short shifts while the other kept watch. Thomas woke and needed feeding, needed changing, needed the small attentions that babies always needed, regardless of whether the world was falling apart. "You're good with him," Caleb said, watching Eliza care for her son with practiced efficiency. "I'm his mother. I don't have a choice. Some mothers would have given up by now. Some mothers didn't spend 3 days tied to a post waiting to die. Gives you perspective on what's worth fighting for." They reached the canyon by mid-afternoon. It was exactly as Caleb remembered, a narrow slash in the rocks with steep walls and a spring-fed pool at the back. Easy to defend, hard to find if you didn't know where to look. They set up camp in a sheltered spot near the water, stringing a tarp between rocks to create something like shelter. That night they ate cold food and spoke in whispers, even though the nearest human was probably miles away. The canyon amplified sound, made everything echo. A horse's whinny would carry. A baby's cry would travel. They'd have to be careful. "How long do we stay here?" Eliza asked. "Until I hear from Sarah. Until I can get her testimony to someone who matters. And if you don't hear from her, then we figure out something else." Eliza pulled Thomas closer, sheltering him against the night chill. "I'm tired of running." "I know. I'm tired of being scared all the time." "I know." "Do you?" She looked at him across the small space between them. "You seem like nothing scares you." "Everything scares me," Caleb admitted. "I'm just good at not showing it." "Why?" "Because showing fear doesn't help. Doesn't change anything, so you bury it and keep moving." "That sounds lonely." "It is." They were quiet for a while. Then Eliza spoke again, softer this time. "Thank you. For everything. For not leaving us. For caring when no one else did." "You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do, because without you, Thomas and I would be dead, and nobody would have even noticed we were gone." Caleb didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and added more wood to the small fire they'd risked building. The flames cast dancing shadows on the canyon walls, made the darkness beyond seem deeper. Somewhere out there, Marcus Vance was gathering his men, planning his attack, preparing to finish what he'd started. And here they sat in a canyon with barely enough supplies to last a week, hoping that truth and testimony would somehow be enough to stop what was coming. It seemed impossible, but then again, so had surviving this long. 3 days in the canyon taught Caleb things he hadn't wanted to learn, like how Thomas's cries echoed off the rock walls and made his chest tighten with worry that someone might hear. Like how Eliza's hand shook when she thought he wasn't looking, the tremor getting worse each day they stayed hidden. Like how waiting felt worse than fighting, how doing nothing ate at you in ways that action never did. On the 4th morning, Caleb made the decision he'd been avoiding. "I'm going back to Bitter Creek," he told Eliza. She was washing Thomas's clothes in the spring pool, scrubbing them against rocks with methodical determination. Her hands stopped moving. "That's not smart." "Nothing about this situation is smart. But I need to know if Sarah made it out. Need to check for messages. And if the Vances are watching the town? Then I'll be careful. Eliza stood, water dripping from the small shirt she'd been washing. You keep saying that. I'll be careful. It's like being careful is some kind of magic spell that keeps you safe. You got a better idea? Yes, stay here. Stay hidden. Wait for them to give up and move on. They won't give up, Eliza. You know that. Then we leave the territory entirely. Head west. Change our names. Start over somewhere they can't find us. Caleb had thought about it. Spent half the night turning the idea over, looking for angles that might work. We'd be running forever, looking over our shoulders every day. That's not a life. It's better than being dead. Is it? He picked up his rifle, checked the action out of habit. I didn't pull you off that post just to spend the rest of our lives hiding. There has to be a way through this that doesn't end with us afraid of every stranger who rides past. You're one man, Caleb. One man against a family that owns half the territory and doesn't care who they have to kill to protect their reputation. Her voice cracked. I can't watch you die for me. I can't. Then don't watch. But I'm going. He left before she could argue more, before the look in her eyes could change his mind. The ride to Bitter Creek took longer than usual because he avoided the main trails, stuck to rough country where tracks would be hard to follow. The sun climbed higher, turned the air thick and heavy. By the time he reached the outskirts of town, sweat had soaked through his shirt. He approached from the north, came in behind the buildings where fewer people would see him. The general store had a back entrance that opened onto an alley cluttered with crates and barrels. Caleb tied his horse there and slipped inside. The store was empty except for the owner, a narrow man named Fletcher who'd always seemed more interested in his ledgers than his customers. He looked up when the back door opened, startled, then his expression shifted to something like recognition mixed with wariness. "Rourke," he said. "Wasn't expecting to see you. Got any messages for me?" Fletcher glanced toward the front windows, checking to see if anyone was watching. "Might. Depends." "On what?" "On whether you know there's men looking for you. Vance men. They've been through here twice asking questions, letting people know there's money for anyone who sees you." Caleb's hand drifted toward his rifle. "How much money?" $50. That's a lot out here. People will talk for less." "You planning to talk?" Fletcher went back to his ledger, made a notation with careful precision. "I don't care for the Vances much. They buy on credit and pay late, act like they're doing me a favor by shopping here. So no, I'm not planning to talk. But you should know what you're walking into. Appreciate the warning. Now about those messages." Fletcher reached under the counter and pulled out an envelope. Plain paper, no markings. "Came 3 days ago. Woman who delivered it said to give it to you and no one else. Paid me $2 to make sure it stayed quiet." Caleb took the envelope and opened it. Inside was a single sheet covered in shaky handwriting. "Mr. Rourke, we made it to my sister's place. Took longer than expected. One of my children got sick on the road and we had to stop for 2 days, but we're safe now. I'm ready to tell what I saw whenever you need me to. My sister says I'm crazy for getting involved, but some things you can't walk away from. Send word when you know what comes next. Sarah Brennan." At the bottom, she'd written an address in Colorado, a town Caleb had never heard of but was grateful existed. "Good news?" Fletcher asked. "Maybe." Caleb folded the letter and tucked it in his pocket. "You know anyone who can get a message to the territorial governor?" Fletcher's eyebrows went up. "The governor? That's ambitious. That's necessary." "Well," Fletcher tapped his pencil against the counter, thinking. "There's a circuit judge who comes through once a month. Judge Farrell. He's not in the Vance's pocket, at least not completely. He might know how to reach the governor's office." "When's he due?" "Should have been here last week, but he's running late. Could show up today, could be another week." Caleb felt frustration building in his chest. Everything moved too slow out here, every step forward requiring patience he didn't have. "I need to get word out faster than that." "Then you're going to have to ride to the territorial capital yourself. That's 3 days' journey, minimum. And you'd be crossing Vance land for half of it." "Not an option." Fletcher shrugged. "Then you wait for Judge Farrell and hope he's feeling helpful." Caleb was about to respond when he heard it, the sound of multiple horses approaching from the south. Fletcher heard it too. His face went tight. Back door, he said quietly. Now. Caleb moved fast, slipping out the way he'd come in. Through a gap between buildings, he saw them. Marcus Vance and 6 men, riding slow down the main street. Marcus's eyes swept the storefronts, the alleys, looking for something, looking for someone. Caleb pressed himself against the wall, barely breathing. His horse was tied 20 feet away, too far to reach without being seen. He'd have to wait them out, hope they kept moving. But Marcus reined in his horse right in front of the general store. The other riders stopped with him. "Mr. Fletcher," Marcus called out, his voice carrying, "mind if we come in?" Through the back window, Caleb could see Fletcher moving toward the front. "Store's open to anyone with money." Always the businessman. Marcus dismounted, and 3 of his men did the same. The others stayed on their horses watching the street. "We're looking for someone. Man named Caleb Rourke. Heard he's been coming through town." "Lots of people come through town. But this one's special. This one's got something that belongs to my family." Marcus's boots sounded on the wooden floor. "You seen him recently?" "Can't say I have." "Can't say or won't say." There was a pause. Caleb could imagine Fletcher weighing his options, calculating the cost of honesty against the cost of lying. "Haven't seen him," Fletcher said finally. "But if I do, you want me to send word? That would be neighborly of you. There's money in it, good money." "I'll keep that in mind." Marcus must have been moving around the store, looking. Caleb heard footsteps, the sound of something being shifted. Then Marcus spoke again, closer to the back now. "You know what I find interesting, Mr. Fletcher? Your back door is open, like maybe someone came through recently and left in a hurry." Caleb's hand went to his rifle. If Marcus came out that door, this would end one of 2 ways, both of them bad. "Wind must have blown it open," Fletcher said. His voice stayed level, but Caleb could hear the strain underneath. "Latch doesn't catch right sometimes." More footsteps. Then they moved away from the back, toward the front again. "Well, if the wind happens to blow Mr. Rourke through your store, you'll let us know, won't you?" "Sure thing, Mr. Vance." The men left. Caleb waited, counting heartbeats, making sure they were really gone. Through the window, he watched them mount up and ride north, in the direction of his cabin, going to check if he'd come back, going to finish what they'd started. When the sound of hooves faded, Caleb slipped back inside. Fletcher was behind the counter again, but his hands were shaking now. "That was close," the store owner said. "Too close. I need to get out of here." "Not yet. They'll be watching the roads. Give it an hour. Let them get some distance." Caleb didn't like it, but Fletcher was right. Riding out now would just put him in their path. He moved to a corner where he could see both doors and settled in to wait. Fletcher went back to his ledger, but after a minute he spoke without looking up. "Why are you doing this? Fighting them, I mean. You could have just walked away. Let her deal with her own problems." "Could have," Caleb agreed. "But you didn't." "No." "Why not?" Caleb thought about the question. It was the same one Eliza had asked, the same one he'd been asking himself. "Because walking away would have made me the same as everyone else who left her to die. And I'm not okay being that person." Fletcher nodded slowly, still not looking up. "My daughter was killed 3 years ago. Husband beat her to death. Everyone knew he was doing it. We could see the bruises, hear her making excuses. But nobody did anything because he came from a good family, and she was just my daughter, not important enough to matter." "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Be the person who doesn't walk away. There's too few of those." Fletcher finally looked up, and his eyes were wet. "Now get out of here before they come back. And when Judge Farrell shows up, I'll make sure he knows you need to talk." Caleb waited another 20 minutes, then slipped out the back and mounted his horse. The ride back to the canyon felt exposed, dangerous. Every shadow could be a rider. Every sound could be pursuit. But he made it without incident, found Eliza waiting at the canyon entrance with Thomas in her arms and fear in her eyes. "I heard horses," she said. "Thought maybe they'd found us. They were in town, looking for me." He dismounted and told her about the visit, about Fletcher, about Sarah's letter. "So she made it," Eliza said. "That's something." "It's more than something. It's proof. A witness who can testify that the Vances left you to die. And we get that testimony to who exactly? You said yourself the territorial capital is 3 days away across Vance land." "Judge Farrell. He's not completely owned by them. If I can talk to him, convince him to carry the message. If. Eliza shifted Thomas to her other hip. We're building a plan out of maybes and hoping it's enough. You got a better idea? I had a better idea, running, starting over, but you didn't like that one. They were both tired, both scared, both snapping at each other because they couldn't snap at the people who actually deserved it. Caleb took a breath, forced himself to speak calmer. I know this is hard, he said. I know you're scared, but running won't fix this. The Vances will hunt us until we're dead, or until we make it too expensive for them to keep hunting. And the only way to make it expensive is to expose what they did. And if the judge won't help, if nobody will, then we go to Plan B. What's Plan B? Caleb looked at her, at the baby, at everything he'd somehow become responsible for. I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. The days crawled past. Caleb made one more trip to Bitter Creek, careful to approach at night when he was less likely to be seen. Fletcher told him the judge still hadn't arrived, that the Vances had been through twice more, that the whole town was nervous like something bad was building. They're planning something, Fletcher said. I can feel it. Whatever it is, it's coming soon. Caleb rode back to the canyon with that warning sitting heavy in his gut. Found Eliza teaching Thomas to track movement with his eyes, dangling a piece of cloth and watching him follow it back and forth. Such a normal moment in the middle of all this chaos. We might need to move deeper into the territory, Caleb said. Get further from Bitter Creek. And go where? North. There's mining camps up in the mountains. Places where the Vances don't have as much reach. Mining camps. Eliza's voice was flat. Places full of men who haven't seen a woman in months. That sounds real safe. Safer than here if they find us. Nothing's safe, Caleb. Don't you get that? There is no place we can go where we'll be safe. The Vances have too much power, too much reach. We're just delaying the inevitable. So what? We give up? Hand you over and hope they're merciful? No. She looked at Thomas, at her son's small, perfect face. No, we keep fighting, because what else can we do? But I'm tired of pretending this ends well. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. He sat outside the makeshift shelter watching stars wheel overhead and thinking about all the choices that had led him here. If he'd ridden past that crying baby. If he'd left Eliza at the nearest town. If he'd been a different kind of man. But he wasn't a different kind of man. He was this one, sitting in a canyon with a woman and baby he barely knew, preparing to fight a war he couldn't win. And somehow, despite everything, he didn't regret it. Movement in the darkness made him grab his rifle. Then Eliza emerged from the shelter, Thomas asleep against her shoulder. Can't sleep either? She asked. Too much thinking. She sat beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her body in the cold night air. What are you thinking about? How we got here. Where we go from here. Whether any of it matters. It matters, Eliza said quietly. Even if we lose, even if the Vances win, it matters that someone tried, that someone cared enough to stand against them. That going to be enough for you, knowing we tried? I don't know. Ask me when it's over. They sat in silence for a while. Then Eliza spoke again, softer. When this started, when you found me, I thought I was already dead, like my body just hadn't figured it out yet, and you, her voice caught, you made me believe I could survive, that Thomas could have a life. I don't know if we'll make it through this, but you gave me something I thought I'd lost. You gave me hope. Caleb didn't know what to say to that. He'd never been good with words, with expressing things that mattered. So he just nodded, and they kept sitting there, two people in the dark trying to believe that morning would come and they'd still be alive to see it. On the 7th day in the canyon, everything changed. Caleb had gone hunting, tracking a deer through the scrub beyond the canyon entrance. He was lining up a shot when he heard it, the distant sound of gunfire. Not one shot, but several. A firefight. He abandoned the deer and ran back toward the canyon, rifle in hand and heart pounding. As he got closer, the shooting stopped. Silence fell, worse than the noise had been. He approached carefully, using every bit of cover. When he reached the canyon entrance, he saw them. 3 horses tied to scrub brush, saddles empty. The Vances had found them. Caleb moved into the canyon quiet as he could, following the walls where shadows would hide him. He heard voices ahead echoing off the rocks. Marcus Vance, one of his brothers, and Eliza. "Just come peaceful," Marcus was saying. "Nobody else needs to get hurt." "Where's Thomas?" Eliza's voice was sharp with panic. "What did you do with my son?" "The baby's fine. He's with James back by the horses." "We're not monsters, Eliza. We just want what's ours." "He's not yours. He's mine. William's. William's dead, and that baby is a Vance, which means he belongs with family, real family." Caleb edged around a boulder and saw them. Marcus and his brother had Eliza backed against the canyon wall near the spring. She had a rock in her hand, holding it like a weapon. Her face was scratched and bleeding. She'd fought them. "You can't take him," she said. "I won't let you." "You don't have a choice." Marcus took a step forward. "Now you can come with us. Raise the boy in the Vance household where he belongs. We'll even let that outlaw you've been living with walk away. Or you can refuse, and we'll take the baby anyway and leave you here for the scavengers. Which do you prefer?" Caleb raised his rifle, sighted on Marcus's back. One shot, and this would be over. One shot, and he'd be a killer. And maybe that's what the situation called for. Maybe some problems only had violent solutions. But before he could pull the trigger, Eliza saw him. Her eyes widened just slightly, and Marcus caught the look. He turned, saw Caleb standing there with a rifle pointed at his spine. "Well," Marcus said, surprisingly calm, "here's the outlaw himself. Been looking for you, Rourke." "Let her go." "Can't do that. She's family." "She's a person, and you left her to die." "That's her story. Not much of one, considering there's no proof." Marcus spread his hands, showing he was unarmed. "But I'll tell you what. You lower that rifle, and we can discuss this like civilized men. Maybe work out an arrangement." "No arrangement. You leave. Now. And you don't come back." "That's not how this works. See, I've got men positioned around this canyon. 3 at the entrance, 2 more up on the rim. They hear a shot, they come running. You might get me, might even get my brother, but then you're trapped in here with no way out and a baby to protect." "How do you think that ends?" Caleb's finger stayed on the trigger. He was trying to calculate odds, looking for an angle that didn't end with everyone dead. The silence stretched. Then Thomas started crying, that thin, desperate wail that meant he was scared or hungry or both. The sound came from somewhere behind them, back toward the canyon entrance. Eliza's face crumpled. "Please," she whispered, "please don't take him from me." Marcus's expression didn't change. "Lower the rifle, Rourke. Last chance." Caleb looked at Eliza, at the desperation in her eyes. Looked at Marcus, at the cold calculation. Looked at the situation and saw no good way out. He lowered the rifle. "Smart choice," Marcus said. Then he moved fast, pulled a pistol from inside his coat, and pointed it at Eliza. "Now drop it." Caleb let the rifle fall. It hit the ground with a dull thud that echoed off the canyon walls. "Good. Now we're going to walk out of here nice and calm. My brother here is going to tie you up, just a precaution, you understand. And Eliza's going to come with us, collect her baby, and we're all going to ride back to town. Tomorrow she'll tell the marshal she made a mistake, that grief made her confused. She'll apologize for the trouble she caused, and life goes on." "And if I refuse?" Eliza asked. "Then I shoot Rourke and tell everyone he attacked us, that we had to defend ourselves. The marshal won't question it. We're respected citizens, and he's an outlaw squatting on unclaimed land. Who do you think people will believe?" Marcus's brother moved forward with rope, started binding Caleb's hands behind his back. The rope bit into skin, tight enough to hurt. "You won't get away with this," Caleb said. "We already have. We've been getting away with it for 20 years. This is just one more thing." Marcus gestured to his brother. "Check him for weapons." They found his knife, his pistol, even the small blade he kept in his boot. Left him standing there helpless while Marcus kept the gun pointed at Eliza. "Please," Eliza tried again. "Just let me keep Thomas. I'll leave the territory. You'll never see us again." "Can't do that. The boy stays with family. As for you," Marcus considered, "you've been nothing but trouble, Eliza. But William did care for you, misguided as that was. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to live in a house on Vance property, under supervision. You can see the boy, help raise him, but he'll know who he really belongs to." "A prisoner," Eliza said. "You're making me a prisoner." I'm giving you more than you deserve. Caleb tested the ropes, looking for weakness. They held firm. Marcus's brother stepped back, satisfied with his work. Time to go, Marcus said. He grabbed Eliza's arm and started pulling her toward the canyon entrance. She fought, trying to twist away, but he was stronger. His brother followed behind, watching Caleb. They were maybe 20 feet away when Caleb heard it, the sound of a horse approaching fast. Then voices, shouting. Marcus stopped, turned. A man appeared at the canyon entrance, breathing hard. One of the Vance riders. "Marshal's here," the man said. "Rode up with some territorial deputies, says he needs to talk to you." Marcus's face went tight. "What's he doing here?" "Don't know, but he's got papers, says it's official business." For the first time, uncertainty crossed Marcus's expression. He looked at Eliza, at Caleb, at the situation he'd thought he controlled. Then he made a decision. "Tie her up too. Leave them both here. We'll deal with this and come back." They bound Eliza's hands, left both of them sitting against the canyon wall. Then the Vances rode out, leaving them alone with the sound of water dripping into the spring and Thomas crying somewhere in the distance. Caleb worked at the ropes, trying to loosen them. Eliza was doing the same, her face set with determination. "We have to get to Thomas," she said. "Working on it." The ropes were tight, professionally done, but whoever had tied them hadn't accounted for Caleb's years of getting out of difficult situations. He found a rough edge on the rock behind him and started sawing the rope against it. Slow work, painful work, but it was working. 10 minutes later, the rope frayed enough that he could snap it. His hands came free, bleeding but functional. He untied Eliza and they ran toward the canyon entrance, toward where Thomas's cries were growing weaker. They found him lying in the dirt beside the horses, his blanket dirty and his face red from crying. Eliza scooped him up, held him tight, whispered things Caleb couldn't hear. "We need to move," Caleb said. "Whatever's happening with the marshal, it won't keep them busy long." "Where do we go?" "Anywhere but here." They gathered what supplies they could carry and headed north, away from the canyon, away from Bitter Creek, away from everything that had become too dangerous to defend. Behind them, voices echoed, Marcus returning, realizing they'd escaped. The chase had begun again, but this time Caleb wasn't sure they could outrun it. They ran until Eliza couldn't run anymore, until her legs gave out and she collapsed against a boulder with Thomas clutched to her chest. Caleb kept watch, rifle recovered from where it had fallen, eyes scanning the horizon for dust plumes that would mean riders coming. "We can't keep doing this," Eliza gasped between breaths. "Running, hiding. Thomas needs stability, needs safety." "I know." "Then what's the plan? Because I'm out of ideas and out of strength." Caleb looked at her, dirt-streaked face, torn dress, hands still bleeding from where the ropes had cut. She'd survived more than most people could, kept going when giving up would have been easier. But everyone had a breaking point, and he could see she was close to hers. "The marshal showing up wasn't coincidence," he said. "Someone sent him. Someone with enough authority that even Marcus had to stop and listen." "Who?" "I don't know, but it means something's changed. Someone's paying attention." He checked the sun's position, calculating time and distance. "We need to get back to Bitter Creek, find out what happened." "That's suicide. The Vances will be looking for us there." "Maybe, but running blind won't save us either." He looked at Thomas, at the baby who'd fallen asleep despite everything. "We need answers, and Bitter Creek is where we'll find them." They waited until dark, then started moving. Caleb led them on a wide loop that avoided the main trails, using every trick he'd learned in the war to cover their tracks and stay hidden. The night was cold and moonless, which made travel harder but concealment easier. By dawn, they were within sight of Bitter Creek. Caleb found a sheltered spot in some rocks overlooking the town and told Eliza to wait there with Thomas. Then he worked his way down alone, moving from shadow to shadow like a ghost. The town was more active than he'd ever seen it. Horses lined the main street, not just local animals, but ones that looked fresh, well-fed, official. And in front of the saloon stood a group of men in uniform, territorial deputies from the look of them, and standing with them, talking to the bartender, was a man in a suit who carried himself with the kind of authority that didn't need announcing. Caleb worked his way to the back of Fletcher's store and slipped inside through the unlocked door. Fletcher was at the counter, but he wasn't alone. Judge Farrell sat on a stool drinking coffee that steamed in the morning chill. Both men looked up when Caleb entered. "Well," Judge Farrell said, setting down his cup, "there's the man everyone's looking for." Caleb raised his rifle slightly. "Should I be worried about that?" "Depends on whether you've done what the Vances claim you've done." "What do they claim?" "Kidnapping, assault, theft of property." The judge studied him with sharp eyes. "The property being one, Eliza Vance and her infant son." "She's not property, and I didn't kidnap anyone." "That's what I figured." Farrell stood, moved to pour himself more coffee. "Which is why I brought some friends. Territorial deputies with a writ to investigate the Vance family's activities. Seems someone filed a formal complaint about attempted murder." Caleb's hand tightened on the rifle. "Who filed it?" "Woman named Sarah Brennan. Sent an affidavit to the territorial governor's office detailing what she witnessed. The governor, being a man who doesn't appreciate families trying to murder inconvenient relatives, sent me to look into it." Farrell took a sip of coffee. "So here I am, looking." Fletcher spoke up. "The Vances aren't happy about it. Elizabeth came into town yesterday, tried to dismiss the whole thing as lies from a disgruntled employee, but the judge here wasn't buying it. I've dealt with Elizabeth Vance before," Farrell said. "Know her type. The kind who thinks power makes them untouchable. But territorial law supersedes local influence, and right now territorial law is very interested in what happened to Eliza Vance." Caleb felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief exactly, but the first hint that maybe, possibly, they weren't completely alone in this. "You believe Sarah's testimony?" "I believe it warrants investigation, which is why I need to speak with Mrs. Vance herself. Get her account of events. She's safe. Hidden. I need more than your word that she's safe. I need to see her, hear her story directly." Caleb looked at Fletcher, who nodded slightly. Then back at the judge. "If I bring her here, can you guarantee her protection?" "I've got 6 armed deputies who answer to the territorial government, not the Vance family. So yes, I can guarantee it." "What about Marcus? His brothers? They won't just let her walk into town and start talking." "Marcus and his brothers are currently in a room at the boarding house, being very politely detained while I conduct my investigation. They're not happy about it, but they're cooperating." Farrell's smile was thin. For now. It was the break they needed, maybe the only one they'd get. Caleb made his decision. "Give me 2 hours. I'll bring her in." He left the way he'd come, worked his way back to where Eliza waited. She saw his face and stood, already reading the change. "What happened?" He told her everything, about Sarah's affidavit, about Judge Farrell, about the deputies, about the possibility that they might actually have a chance at something resembling justice. Eliza listened without interrupting. When he finished, she looked down at Thomas, then back at Caleb. "You think we can trust him? This judge?" "I think he's the best option we've got. Maybe the only option." "And if it's a trap? If the Vances have already gotten to him? Then we're no worse off than we are now." She nodded slowly, accepting the truth of it. "All right, let's go talk to a judge." They entered Bitter Creek together, walking down the main street in full daylight. People stopped to stare, at Eliza with her torn dress and bruised face, at Caleb with his rifle and hard eyes, at the baby who'd become the center of all this trouble. Whispers followed them, but no one moved to stop them. The deputies were waiting outside the saloon. They took one look at Eliza and their expressions shifted from neutral professionalism to something harder. One of them, a young man who looked barely old enough to wear a badge, actually stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "are you hurt? Do you need a doctor?" The kindness in his voice almost broke her. Eliza shook her head, not trusting herself to speak. Judge Farrell emerged from the saloon. He took in Eliza's appearance with a single glance, and his jaw tightened. "Mrs. Vance, I'm Judge Thomas Farrell. Would you be willing to answer some questions?" "Yes." "Inside then, away from prying eyes." They went into the saloon. The bartender had cleared out the other patrons, giving them privacy. Farrell gestured to a table and they all sat. Caleb, Eliza with Thomas, the judge with a notebook and pencil. 2 deputies stood by the doors, watching. "Tell me what happened," Farrell said. "From the beginning. Take your time." So Eliza told him. About William's death, about the accusations, about being tied to a post in the desert and left to die. Her voice stayed steady for most of it, only breaking when she described the ropes cutting into her wrists, the certainty that she and Thomas would die there. Farrell took notes, asked clarifying questions, never interrupted the flow of her story. When she finished, he set down his pencil and looked at her with an expression that might have been sympathy, or might have been anger, or might have been both. You're saying the Vance family attempted to murder you and your infant son? Yes. And you have a witness who saw them take you. Sarah Brennan. She was there. She saw everything. I have her affidavit. But I need more than testimony. I need evidence. He looked at her wrists, at the fading rope burns. May I see? Eliza held out her hands. The marks were still visible, deep grooves where the rope had cut, scabs that hadn't fully healed. Farrell examined them carefully, then made more notes. These are consistent with your account, but the Vances will argue that they came from somewhere else, that you injured yourself, or that Mr. Rourke here did this to you. That's not what happened. I believe you, but believing and proving are different things in court. Farrell sat back, thinking, where did they leave you, the exact location? I don't know exactly. Somewhere east of Bitter Creek. Maybe 10, 15 miles. There was an outcrop of rocks, some scrub brush, a post driven into the ground. The post might still be there. If it is, if we can find it with rope still attached, that's physical evidence. Farrell looked at Caleb. You found her. Can you take us to the location? Yeah, I can find it. Then that's what we'll do. Mrs. Vance, I'm going to ask you to stay here under deputy protection while we ride out. If we can corroborate your story with physical evidence, that combined with Sarah Brennan's testimony should be enough to bring formal charges. What kind of charges? Eliza asked. Attempted murder, conspiracy, child endangerment. Farrell's voice hardened. The Vances may have power in this territory, but they're not above the law, and I intend to prove it. Within an hour, they were riding east. Caleb, Judge Farrell, and 4 deputies. The land looked different in daylight, less menacing, but no less empty. Caleb led them by memory, retracing the path he'd taken all those weeks ago when he'd heard a baby crying and made the choice to investigate. It took 3 hours to find the place. The outcrop of rocks, the scattered scrub brush, and there, still standing, the post. Rope dangled from it, frayed and weathered, but unmistakably present. Farrell dismounted and examined it carefully. He touched the rope, noted the height it hung at, the way the post had been driven deep into the ground. Then he turned to look at Caleb. This is where you found her? Tied to that post, barely conscious. The baby was on the ground, screaming. One of the deputies whistled low. They really did it. Left her out here to die. Document everything, Farrell told his men. Measurements, photographs if you can manage it, descriptions. This post is evidence and I want it preserved. They spent an hour gathering what they needed. Then they rode back to Bitter Creek, the post itself loaded onto a pack horse as physical proof of what the Vances had done. When they returned, Eliza was sitting in the saloon with Thomas, surrounded by a small group of women who'd brought food and clean clothes and quiet sympathy. She looked up when they entered, and Caleb nodded. The relief on her face was something to see. We found it, Farrell said. The post, the rope, everything exactly as you described. Combined with Sarah Brennan's testimony, we have enough to proceed. Proceed with what? Arrest warrants for Marcus Vance, his brothers James and Robert, and potentially Elizabeth Vance herself. Charges of conspiracy to commit murder. Eliza's hand went to her mouth. You're really going to arrest them? I'm really going to try. Whether it sticks depends on a lot of factors. How good their lawyers are, how much pressure they can bring to bear, whether witnesses can be intimidated into changing their stories. Farrell's expression was grim. I won't lie to you, Mrs. Vance. This is going to be a fight. The Vances will use every resource they have to discredit you, to make this go away. But we're going to fight back, and we're going to win. How can you be sure? Because I've seen too many powerful families get away with too much for too long, and I'm tired of it. He stood, gathered his notebook. You'll need to stay in town, under protection. We'll arrange lodging at the boarding house, separate rooms from where the Vances are being held, and you'll need to be available to testify when this goes to trial. Trial? Eliza repeated, like the word was foreign. When? Could be weeks, could be months. The territorial prosecutor will need to build a case, and the Vances will do everything they can to delay. But it will happen. After Farrell left, Caleb and Eliza sat alone in the saloon. Thomas was asleep in her arms, peaceful despite everything swirling around him. "I can't believe this is happening," Eliza said quietly. "That someone's actually going to hold them accountable. It's not over yet. I know, but it's more than I had yesterday, more than I thought I'd ever have." She looked at him. "You did this. You made this possible." "Sarah did this. She's the one who sent the affidavit. Because you gave her the courage to. Because you showed her that standing up to them was possible." Eliza's eyes were wet. "You saved my life twice, Caleb. Once in that desert, and once by refusing to let me give up hope." Caleb didn't know what to say to that. He'd never been good at accepting gratitude, at believing he deserved it, so he just nodded and looked away. The next days passed in a strange limbo. The Vances remained detained, but their lawyers arrived from the territorial capital. Expensive men in expensive suits who filed motions and made arguments and generally did everything they could to undermine the case. Elizabeth Vance herself came to town, imperious and cold, and tried to convince Judge Farrell that this was all a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. Farrell didn't budge. The evidence was too strong, the testimony too clear. Arrest warrants were issued. Marcus, James, and Robert Vance were formally charged with attempted murder and conspiracy. Elizabeth managed to avoid charges herself. Nothing directly tied her to the act, and her lawyers were good enough to create reasonable doubt about her involvement. But the damage was done. The story spread through the territory like wildfire. The powerful Vance family, brought low by their own cruelty. Some people rallied to their defense, claimed it was all lies and persecution. But others, people who'd been hurt by the Vances over the years, started coming forward with their own stories. The empire Elizabeth had built on fear began to crack. Through it all, Eliza stayed in Bitter Creek. The women of the town, who'd initially kept their distance, gradually warmed to her, brought her clothes, helped with Thomas, offered quiet support that felt like redemption for having looked away before. She wasn't fully accepted. Small towns had long memories and shorter forgiveness. But she wasn't completely alone anymore either. Caleb stayed too, though it felt unnatural to him. Being in town, surrounded by people and noise and expectations, made him restless. He'd spent so long alone that civilization felt like a coat that didn't quite fit. One evening, about 2 weeks after the arrests, Eliza found him sitting outside the boarding house watching the sunset. "You're thinking about leaving," she said. It wasn't a question. "No. Don't lie. I can see it on your face." She sat beside him, Thomas bundled against the evening chill. "You don't belong in towns. This place is suffocating you." "I'll manage." "You don't have to. The trial's not for another month at least, and when it happens, you won't need to testify. You're not the witness they need." Caleb looked at her. "You want me to leave?" "No, but I won't ask you to stay if it's killing you. You've already given more than anyone had a right to ask for." "What will you do?" Eliza looked down at Thomas, at her son's small, sleeping face. "Judge Farrell says there's a fund for victims of crime. Money to help me get established somewhere. He thinks I should leave the territory after the trial, start fresh somewhere. The Vance name doesn't matter." "Sounds smart. Sounds lonely." She met his eyes. "But maybe lonely is better than looking over my shoulder forever." They sat in silence for a while. Then Caleb spoke, words coming out before he could think them through. "There's land up north, beyond the Vance's reach. Good land. Water, timber, room to build something that lasts." He paused. "Room for more than one person if they wanted it." Eliza went very still. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you don't have to be alone. That Thomas could grow up somewhere safe, that maybe we could build something together, not because we have to, but because we choose to." "You're asking me to stay with you?" "I'm asking if you'd want to. No obligations, no expectations, just a choice." Eliza looked at him for a long moment. Then she started crying. Not sad tears, but the kind that came from relief and hope and emotions too big to contain. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'd want that." The trial happened 6 weeks later in the territorial capital. Caleb and Eliza made the journey together, along with Judge Farrell in a wagon full of evidence. Sarah Brennan came from Colorado to testify, looking scared but determined. Other witnesses appeared, people who'd been hurt by the Vances over the years, who finally felt safe enough to speak. The trial lasted 3 days. The Vance lawyers were good, tried every trick to discredit the witnesses and cast doubt on the evidence. But the rope burns on Eliza's wrists were real. The post in the desert was real. Sarah's testimony was clear and unwavering, and the jury, made up of people from outside the Vances' sphere of influence, saw through the smoke and mirrors. Marcus Vance was convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to 15 years in prison. His brothers got 10 years each. The family's reputation was destroyed, their business empire crumbling as partners and associates distanced themselves from the scandal. Elizabeth Vance walked free, but she'd lost what mattered most: power. Without her sons, without the fear she'd cultivated, she was just an old woman watching her legacy burn. After the verdict, Eliza stood on the courthouse steps with Thomas in her arms and breathed air that felt different somehow, cleaner, lighter. "It's over," she said. "Yeah," Caleb agreed. "It's over." They left the territorial capital that afternoon, heading north toward the land Caleb had mentioned. It took them 4 days of travel, the last leg through mountains that scraped the sky. But when they crested the final ridge and saw the valley below, green and wide and empty of everything except possibility, Eliza understood why Caleb had spoken of it. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's home, if you want it to be." They built a cabin together over the next months. Not the rough shelter Caleb had lived in before, but something real. 4 rooms, glass windows, a stone fireplace that drew smoke perfectly. Eliza planted a garden. Caleb built furniture and fences. Thomas grew, went from crying infant to babbling baby to a child who could sit up and grab at things. One evening, in early fall, they sat outside watching the sun set over mountains that had no names. Thomas was playing with wooden blocks Caleb had carved, making small sounds of concentration. "Do you regret it?" Eliza asked. "Stopping that day. Helping us." Caleb thought about the question, about everything it had cost, everything it had given. "No." "Do you?" "Not for a second." 6 months later, they got married. No church, no formal ceremony, just the 2 of them and Thomas and a traveling preacher who happened through and was willing to speak words over them. Eliza wore a dress she'd made herself. Caleb wore clean clothes and tried not to look uncomfortable. Thomas slept through the whole thing. Afterward, standing in front of their cabin with rings made from bent nails, Eliza spoke the truth that had been building for months. "I love you," she said. "Not because you saved me, but because you gave me the freedom to save myself. Because you showed me that some people will fight for what's right, even when it costs them everything." Caleb wasn't good with words, never had been, but he pulled her close and spoke into her hair the only truth that mattered. "I love you too." Years passed. Thomas grew from baby to boy to young man. 2 more children came, a daughter named Sarah after the woman who'd found her courage, and another son who had Caleb's eyes and Eliza's stubborn chin. The cabin expanded to accommodate them, became a house with real walls and solid foundations. People occasionally found their way to the valley. Some were running from things, like Caleb had been. Some were looking for things, like Eliza had been. Caleb and Eliza welcomed them when they could, offered help without asking questions, because they knew what it meant to need help and have someone choose to give it. The Vance family faded into history. Elizabeth died bitter and alone. Marcus served his sentence and emerged a broken man who disappeared into obscurity. The empire they'd built collapsed completely. The land redistributed to people who'd been waiting for their chance. And in a valley far from all of that, a family grew. Not perfect. They fought sometimes, struggled with money and weather and all the small disasters that came with living. But they faced it together. They chose each other every day, not out of need, but out of love. Thomas, when he was old enough to ask, wanted to know how his parents had met. Eliza looked at Caleb, and they shared the kind of glance people share when they've survived something terrible together and come out stronger for it. "Your father heard you crying," Eliza said, and instead of riding past, he stopped. That one choice changed everything. "Why did you stop?" Thomas asked Caleb. Caleb thought about it. about all the reasons he could give, all the explanations that would make sense, but he settled on the simplest truth. Because it was the right thing to do. Is that enough? Just doing the right thing? Sometimes that's all you've got. Sometimes it has to be enough. Caleb looked at his son, at this person who existed because of choices made years ago in a desert that felt like another lifetime. The world's full of people who walk past crying babies, who see suffering and decide it's not their problem. But if everyone made that choice, what kind of world would we have? A bad one, Thomas said. Yeah, a bad one. Caleb smiled, something he did more often now. So sometimes you have to be the person who stops, who helps, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Thomas absorbed this, the way children do when they're learning what it means to be human. Then he went back to playing, the lesson filed away for when he'd need it. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Eliza and Caleb sat outside like they often did. The stars were bright, the air cold but not uncomfortable. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. "We did all right, didn't we?" Eliza said. "Yeah, we did all right. 3 kids, a house that doesn't leak, enough to eat, more than I ever thought I'd have. More than either of us thought we'd have." Eliza leaned against him, and they sat there in the comfortable silence of people who'd earned their peace. The world was still hard, still cruel in places. But here, in this valley, they'd built something that pushed back against that cruelty. Something that said love was stronger than hate, choice was stronger than circumstance, and one person's decision to care could change everything. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. The scars remained, physical and otherwise. Nightmares still came sometimes. The memory of being tied to a post, of nearly losing everything, never fully faded. But those scars were part of who they were now, part of what they'd survived. And survival, Caleb had learned, wasn't just about living. It was about finding reasons to keep living, about building something worth protecting, about looking at the person beside you and knowing that whatever came next, you wouldn't face it alone. Years later, when people asked about the family in the Northern Valley, they'd hear different versions of the story. Some said Caleb Rourke was a hero who'd saved a woman from certain death. Some said Eliza Vance was a survivor who'd overcome terrible odds. Some said it was a love story about 2 broken people who'd healed each other. All of those things were true, and none of them were the whole truth. The whole truth was simpler and more complicated than any story could capture. It was about a man who chose mercy when cruelty would have been easier, a woman who chose hope when despair would have been justified, a baby who became a boy who became a man who carried forward the lesson that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop, listen, help. In a world that often felt too big and too cruel and too indifferent to individual suffering, they'd proven that one person's choice mattered, that stepping forward when others stepped back could save more than just a life. It could save the possibility of life, of love, of everything that made survival worth the struggle. The fire in their hearth burned warm. The children slept safe. And 2 people who'd found each other in the worst of circumstances sat together in the peace they'd earned, knowing that whatever tomorrow brought, they'd face it the same way they'd faced everything else. Together. Not because fate demanded it, not because they had no other choice, but because every day they chose each other. Chose love over fear, chose building over breaking, chose to be the kind of people who stopped when they heard someone crying, who helped when help was needed, who stood against cruelty even when the cost was high. And that choice, repeated day after day, year after year, became more than a choice. It became a life, a family, a legacy. It became home.